Viktor Gyökeres is so desperate to join Arsenal. He's giving me Peter Odemwingie vibes. All we need now is him to turn up outside London Colney in his car with the window wound down. Viktor Gyökeres is said to be willing to give up 2 million euros to help things along with this deal. Arsenal very much closing in on their man. We're going to discuss that. Noni Madueke, Leandro Trossard, and more on this live episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner pod. Thanks for joining me. Hey everybody, how are we doing? Welcome back to another live episode of the pod. Happy Monday. Hope you all had a wonderful weekend. It was a weekend that started off a little bit slowly. Started off with a little bit of negativity, really, if we're being honest, because the Madueke stuff really seems to have divided opinion. There seems to be more Arsenal fans out there, I think, that believe that actually signing Noni Madueke isn't necessarily the best use of funds. Then there are who are kind of really willing and really behind the idea of bringing the Chelsea man in. So there was a little bit of negativity around at the start of the weekend, but Sunday was a good day. Okay, Sunday morning, I think when we sat down to record the pod, we were talking mainly about Madueke, but as the day went on, we obviously got the Zubimendi announcement that we were long awaiting, but it was the Gyökeres thing that made it go bang. It was the Gyökeres thing, wasn't it, that got everybody excited, that got everybody buzzing, that had us all sort of constantly checking our phones and social media accounts for updates throughout the evening. Here we are now, closing in on our man, closing in on the number 9. Closing in on the striker that we've so desperately wanted for such a long time. Hopefully, we get that deal concluded sooner rather than later. I have just had a very, very quick scroll through social media before going live, and there's a few reports coming out of Portugal claiming that the deal is almost done, that there was an Arsenal delegation in Portugal yesterday, and that Viktor Gyökeres is basically packing his stuff to make that trip over to London. That would be amazing if that's the case. I don't know that. Haven't had it confirmed, but just going by some of the reports we're reading on social media at the time, of course, of recording. So, yeah, exciting times ahead. Look, we got a few other stories to cover off today, so we'll make sure that we do those. We did bring you some reaction to the news that we are closing in on Gyökeres on a bonus podcast that we released last night. I was sitting there throughout the afternoon and I was thinking, I've got so much to say on this. I've got so much that I want to say. I don't know if I want to wait until tomorrow morning to deliver it. So we recorded a bonus pod. That is out. That is available now. You can go back and check it out. This is going to be a slightly less reactionary and emotional assessment of whether or not this deal makes sense, but we're also going to talk about some other stories as well that I think are worth covering off. So let's begin with the story around Leandro Trossard. Now, Leandro Trossard is a player that's we've discussed quite a bit over the course of the summer so far, because here he is, this player that I think has been a really, really good signing for us, a player that didn't cost us an awful lot of money, a player whom we pivoted towards after it became apparent that the demands for Mykhailo Mudryk, if you remember correctly, were crazy. We go and bring Leandro Trossard in. I think he has a really good impact. I think it was always clear that Leandro Trossard was never in that top bracket. Like, he was never going to be, I didn't think, a league-winning starting wide player. But he's always got a goal in him. He's a really accomplished finisher. I think last season, Leandro Trossard's stock maybe fell a little bit in the eyes of our supporters. But I do think that was not totally down to him. I think if you go back and you look through all the games, which I'm sad and I've done, you will find that there were a lot of games in which he was asked to play as a false 9, as part of a front 2 when we first lost Martin Odegaard. We never allowed Leandro Trossard to have the run of games that he would have probably wanted from that left-hand side. That role was shared between him and Gabriel Martinelli. Martinelli mainly started when available because he has this, I think, slightly better all-round game in terms of getting back and defending and supporting the team. And there are certain fixtures where you look at Martinelli and you think it's his defensive work, but it's also his ability to stretch opposition sides that makes him the first pick. Leandro Trossard, prior to that, in my eyes, was very much someone that I always felt was better at impacting off the bench, but we never really had that luxury often enough of calling Leandro Trossard from the bench because we were so short of players. We had so many injuries at so many different points in the season that he was often required to play. And, you know, that sort of impact sub kind of thing that Leandro Trossard sort of made his name at Arsenal for was kind of no more. So I think last season was a difficult one for him. It was a difficult one for a lot of players. I don't want to write Leandro Trossard off. I still make him one of the best finishers at Arsenal Football Club. I still make him a huge asset. I still believe he's got a lot to offer. But obviously, he's going into the last year of his contract. And so the idea of improving the team in the wide areas, you know, in the eyes of a lot of fans, has been built around what we can do on that left-hand side. Now, I know that Arsenal's preference and the ideal scenario here would be to go out and bring in a winger that can play on both sides, because we still probably need that cover for Bukayo Saka. Ethan Nwaneri did that and did that well at times last season, but he is generally, I think, viewed as a more central player, as more of a natural fit to come in and relieve Martin Odegaard of his duties rather than being the guy to play on the right-hand side instead of Bukayo Saka. Although, as I say, I thought he did that quite well. So a lot of the talk's been around the left-hand side. And, you know, it's long been thought that whoever comes in as a winger will be a part of that group that involves Saka, Martinelli, and Trossard. Because I don't think that we are going to let Trossard or Martinelli go. If you had to move on one, I think you'd probably prefer to move on Leandro Trossard, just because Martinelli's still got room to grow and I think offers a lot of other things as well. But, you know, it's been long thought, as I say, that actually both of them are going to stay, and anybody that comes in will be the fourth winger in the group, really. And that'll be that. And that's how we'll look to move forward and progress. Leandro Trossard, though, is the subject of some interest from Turkey. Now, according to some Turkish outlets, and again, I can't sit here and say that they're hugely reliable, based on my previous experiences following stories put out by said outlets. But according to these reports, Trossard will be the subject of a £15 million bid from Fenerbahce, who are willing to meet his salary demands. This speculation, I think, has in part been fueled by the fact that Leandro Trossard has recently changed agent. I think it's important to note that he changed agent because his agent was unwell more than anything else. There wasn't this massive falling out. People do change agents without having falling out. Sometimes you feel like you need to take a slightly different path as a player, and that a different agent can maybe aid you and assist you in doing that and open different doors and put you in touch with other people. Fine. But from what I was reading, it sounds like the split with Leandro Trossard's agent isn't because he's desperately trying to engineer a move away from Arsenal, or that because, you know, the contract talks with Arsenal that we heard about a couple of months ago, but haven't really heard much about since, have suddenly hit a brick wall, and a new fresh pair of eyes and a fresh face as far as the agent is concerned is needed. That isn't our understanding of that situation. It was said that his agent is unwell, has some health issues that he needs to focus on. And so Leandro Trossard, for that reason, and him have agreed to kind of part ways and do things, you know, for themselves. You know, he's got to focus on his health. Trossard's got to focus on his career. And if that means getting someone who can be a little bit more committed and a little bit more, focused, it's better for everybody involved. For Trossard, look, £15 million, final year of his contract. I can see why, if you're Arsenal, you might be tempted. I can, because in 12 months' time, you'll get zero and he'll be gone. But at the same time, I think sometimes you got to put the sporting project ahead of the finances. And so it comes down to a key question. Does that £15 million that you could potentially get for Leandro Trossard, does that aid you enough in your summer transfers to be able to kind of accept the loss of Leandro Trossard from the squad. I think Leandro Trossard's value to the squad is more than £15 million. And so it's like what I was saying about other players in the past when their contracts were running down. I remember in the past talking about players and saying, well, if you're only going to get 5-10 million quid for them because they're in the final year of their contract, aren't you just better off keeping a hold of the player and swallowing the fact that they're going to leave on a free? Because what it's going to cost you to go out and replace them, and I know that you'd be bringing in a replacement for way beyond just that year, it might not make sense at the time. So when I look at the Leandro Trossard thing, my gut is keep him. My gut is he's worth more than £15 million to this squad in terms of what he can contribute. But I also recognize that, the longer we go into the window, and for a player who's over the age of 30, unfortunately, that's the reality of football right now. His value is decreasing by the minute at the moment. In fact, it's dropped like a stone because of his contract situation. So I think, look, if somebody came in with an offer of north of £20 million, I would probably be more open to this idea. And I'd probably be sitting here and saying £20 million last year of his contract, over 30, do it. 15 million, I know there's only £5 million difference. It doesn't really excite me to the point where I would be willing to let him go, unless, you're in a situation where you're really desperately trying to bridge the gap in valuation between yourselves and a potential selling club for another target. And that 15 million can aid you to do that. And then you think that player will be more effective and more useful and more impactful than Leandro Trossard, then I'm not sure. If you don't have anything specific in mind that you're going to do with that 15 million quid and you're just seeking to try and get a return on your investment, I would say prioritize the sporting project and keep a hold of him. That's my view on the rumours linking Leandro Trossard with that move over to Turkey. Elsewhere, we promised you yesterday that we'd talk a little bit more about the story of Martin Zubimendi to Arsenal. This is a transfer that's been long in the making. It's a transfer that was finally announced yesterday, and one that we can all start to enjoy a bit now. Look, we knew it was coming. There was that initial excitement, wasn't there? And there was that initial, oh, wow, this is a guy that rejected Liverpool, and now he's willing to sign for Arsenal. He talks quite candidly in some interviews that he's given in Spanish, and those have been translated, and the reports in England have, of course, given us a little bit of an insight into what exactly was said. Sounds like he was not 100% sure about making the move to England last summer. Apparently, at the time that he was very close, supposedly, to joining Liverpool, he knew that Arsenal were interested. And so I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's like a massive win and we've won a trophy. We're not going to talk about the Zubimendi chose Arsenal trophy or anything like that. But I think that's quite significant because for a while, we've talked a lot about Arsenal needing to act like a big club. Mikel Arteta has always been quite big and quite vocal on this idea of, players should want to join Arsenal Football Club. And there you have it. You have an example of one of the hottest properties in European football when it comes to that number 6 defensive midfield position, who's had offers from other very, very big Premier League football clubs, but has opted to kind of wait, not solely because he wanted us, partly because he probably didn't think it was the right time to leave Real Sociedad. He talked about there being kind of selfish reasons behind that decision he took. But, you've got this guy who, can have his pick of pretty much any club in the world at the moment, given his reputation, and has waited an additional year, in part because he knew that Arsenal were in. And Arsenal being in these days, it carries weight. And people will slag us off and have a go at us. And some of our own fans will have a little bit of a complaint and a little bit of a frustration with the way we go about doing business sometimes. But this transition or this move from being pretenders, a team that could barely qualify for the Champions League, to now a team that people expect to go on and win major trophies with every season, that's been seen. That's been felt by the rest of Europe, to the point where people like Martin Zubimendi are going, I'll wait for Arsenal. I want Arsenal. And the same applies for Viktor Gyökeres as well. I know when you look at his back catalogue, I know when you look at how he's kind of worked his way through football and his career journey so far, you'd say, well, he's played for, some certainly weaker teams here in the UK, went over to Portugal, and obviously in Portugal, where the standard is lower, generally speaking, he's ripped it up, but hasn't really done it at a top tier club yet, at the highest possible level. Again, this is the guy that was the top goal scorer across Europe. This is a guy that lots and lots of clubs have been looking at, and he's been desperate, so desperate that he's willing to give up money to make the move to Arsenal. So I think sometimes as fans, it's fair to say that we get in our own heads, right? We're desperate to see success. We're desperate to see progress, further progress. We're desperate to see us go and land certain players of certain profiles for certain positions. And so when that isn't happening, in the case of Sesko and Gyökeres, it felt like for a long time we hadn't made any progress with anyone. Actually, we'd obviously made quite a bit of progress on the Viktor Gyökeres side, because we're now very, very close to completing that deal and very, very close to reaching a full agreement and getting the old "here we go" from Fabrizio Romano. So it goes to show you that we get in our own heads, we get frustrated, we get anxious. We assume that there is no plan. We assume that there is no action, when a lot of the time there is. And I'm guilty of this too. And that's what happens when you're emotionally attached to a football club, right? You will overblow things in your own mind. The positives will be bigger positives than they maybe are in reality. And the negatives, the lows, will be lower than they are in reality as well, because you've got that emotional attachment. And I certainly feel that that's kind of the journey we've gone through in this summer window so far. But it is really starting to heat up now. We got our backup goalkeeper in. Cheap and cheerful, experienced player, makes a lot of sense. Norgard, very, very close to signing for Arsenal as well. We're still working on Mosquera. We've got Zubimendi in through the door officially now, so no one can moan about that. Until I see him in an Arsenal shirt, I'm not having it, blah. You're not going to hear any of that rubbish anymore. And Viktor Gyökeres is really, really close to signing for Arsenal too. We've got more work to do. Of course, we've got lots more work to be doing and getting on with. Nobody denies that. Let's hope we can bring in an Eberechi Eze. Could we potentially make a move for Rodrigo? There's lots, I think, still to unfold and still to happen in this window, but it feels like it's really got going now. And the mood around the football club has changed. So I just wanted to highlight that part of the Zubimendi story. It's a deal that was agreed in principle, apparently, back when Edu and Ato were in discussions with Real Sociedad over Mikel Merino. Okay, so this is something that's been on the cards for a long, long time. According to the reports, the deal was completely sealed in March. And we heard about some Real Madrid interest. Doesn't sound like Real Madrid were as serious. I'm not going to sit here and pretend, that they were very, very desperate for Martin Zubimendi. It sounds like they kind of put the feelers out post this deal having been pretty much ratified, and so there was no fear, no worry, no concern there. But if they were desperate for him, they would have made a bid, and to my knowledge, they didn't. So yeah. Okay, that's where we're at on the Zubimendi thing. Exciting, because he's an exciting player and he has been very keen on Arsenal for a while. And we've had to wait, but we've ultimately got someone who would have certainly been our primary target in that number 6 position. Okay, short pause. When we come back, we've got more football to chat. We're going to talk Noni Madueke. We're going to talk Viktor Gyökeres, and we're going to take a load of your questions from the live chat. There are over 800 of you with us live on YouTube right now, which is really remarkable. If I could ask, if you haven't done so already, please leave a like on the video. Not a like in the chat box, a like on the video itself. That really, really does help. We've got, as I say, over 800 of you with me live right now. There's only 114 on the board. So let's get that up to as close to 500 as we possibly can. Now, we've been talking Martin Zubimendi. For our patrons, our Martin Zubimendi scouting video is... well, it's been available for our patrons for a few weeks. It's available to all of the rest of you, though, right now on patreon.com/the Chronicles of Viguna. So once you finish watching this stream, head over to it. The link is in the description below and give it a watch, because from midday, it will go back to being a patron-only piece of content. I thought that we were going to, I thought that it would be nice to kind of release it to everybody else to celebrate the official reveal of Martin Zubimendi as an Arsenal player. But here we go. We've got another one out. We've got an Eberechi Eze one that dropped just the other day. So I'm going to play you a very quick teaser from the Eberechi Eze scouting video that we recorded and is available now to patrons. Go over and check it out. Here's a little preview of what to expect. What someone like Eberechi Eze does when he's in possession is he just attracts opposition players. And because he's got the confidence and the ability to kind of lure people in before either laying it off to somebody else or making something happen himself, I think he would be key in those situations. He would be key when, you know, you're passing it from left to right. You are breaking the lines on occasions, but maybe you're not doing it quick enough, and you need somebody that is going to take that responsibility on an individual level. Look at that lovely ball clipped over the top for Ismail Assar. Here he is coming in onto that right foot. Again, wrong foot's 3 defenders in the process. This is him arriving in the box again against City in the cup final. Brilliant finish. He seems to have added that, I think, recently, the ability to kind of box crash. There you go. That's a preview of Eberechi Eze scouting video. Go over and check it out. The link is in the description below. Massive thank you to all our patrons. So many of you have signed up over the last few weeks. Really, really appreciate the love and support. So thank you again for that. Right. Just before I go on to talk about some of the other stories, we've got Inspired Channel saying that Arsenal planning to make a bid for Ebere Eze, according to Mail Sport. I haven't seen that yet. Do you mind, rather than sort of posting the comment, do you mind sharing the link in the chat? And if it's there, we'll have a read through it and we'll have a chat about it while we're live on this pod. So yeah, if you could do that, I'd be very, very grateful. Okay, what should we do next? Let's talk Noni Madueke. This one divides opinion, as I mentioned at the top of the show, but we've got a little bit more information now, it seems, about where the two clubs are at in terms of their valuations for the player. So according to some of the reports I was reading yesterday, it looks like Chelsea, as we thought, value Noni Madueke at about 50 million quid. Arsenal see his value as being closer to 40 million quid. Harry Symeou, not that it matters, sees his value being more like 30 million quid. And so there needed to be a really good deal available to us, which in my book would be about 25, 30 million for me to even consider this as an option. I keep saying it. If it was the third attacking signing, I could see it. And if the price was right, but the price is ultimately going to dictate how I feel about this. So yeah, look, again, 50 million pounds is way over the top. Does he add good squad depth, as is being said by BR London in the chat? Yeah, he does. But, you know, can you afford to be buying greater squad depth in positions that don't feel like a priority before you get your priority signings in? And I know that it's not about necessarily the timing of the transfers. As long as you get all your business done, that's what ultimately matters. And I know that the timing of stuff, it does dictate quite a bit what the reaction is like, right? So had we got the Gyökeres thing wrapped up already, and then we be, let's say, moving forward in the Eze pursuit, for instance, and then this interest in Madueke came out, I think the reaction to it would be quite different. So timing is important, but ultimately it is about what you finish the window with and how your squad looks come the end of the window. So we'll see. We'll see what that's going to look like. I don't want to spend too long on this because we talked about it quite a bit on Sunday morning's podcast. We released 2 episodes on Sunday, one at our normal time during our normal slot, and then we did another one, a bonus one in the evening after we heard of the Viktor Gyökeres news. So yeah, I don't want to go into it too much. I've given my thoughts on the player. Haven't really got a great deal more to kind of add on this. You know, I've got very, very strong feelings about this. My feelings can be, what's the word? Watered down a little bit if the price is right. But if the price is not right, then I just can't understand why this would be seen as a priority bit of business for Arsenal. this summer. But we'll see. We'll see how that develops. We'll see how that unfolds, of course. Right. Let's talk Viktor Gyökeres now and bring you up to speed with these reports claiming that he's willing to give up money to join Arsenal Football Club. Quite remarkable. So, according to Fabrizio Romano and some outlets in Portugal, Viktor Gyökeres is willing to give up 2 million euros of his money in order to help the negotiations along. Look, we don't know that that's true 100%. We don't know the ins and outs of it. I don't know whether that would be from money he would stand to receive from Arsenal or whether that would be from money that he stands to still receive from Sporting. If I'm being honest, I don't know the ins and outs of this. I don't think any of the reporting is particularly clear around this either. And so I'm not going to try and drill too far down into the details. Instead, I'm going to talk about how this makes me feel. I think, a lot of the time we look at players and we say it's all about talent. Okay. And if you've got the talent, then that's all that matters. But mentality is key as well. Mentality is huge. And often people would look at players like Viktor Gyökeres through a certain lens and they'd say, well, this guy's 27 years old. And where has he really played of note to suggest that this is the guy that we should be going out and breaking the bank to sign this summer? But there are examples over the years of players who developed later, of players who developed at a later stage, in part because they'd been through some really difficult experiences, sometimes lower down the league, sometimes at less glamorous clubs, sometimes at clubs in different divisions. And they went on to really thrive at a slightly later point in their career. I think in our eyes, right, we look at this very black and white, right? So you'd say that from 18 to 21, you class a player now as a young player. From maybe 23 to 29, you'd say, or 28, you'd say that's their peak. And then after that, you'd argue that there's normally a decline. But that isn't always how it works. Think of people like Jamie Vardy, right, who went through this really grueling career up until the point where he landed at Leicester City, and he was able to move with the level change and become a really effective player and had his best days at a much later stage in his career than most people would. I would argue that Olivier Giroud is another player who, as he got older, got better. And as he got older, became more and more accomplished and used some of the difficult and tough experiences he'd had through his career to make himself the best version of himself at a slightly later point. Kari Tanninen points out, Ian Wright. There's a lot of players. There's a lot of players who, break that mold, who aren't necessarily amazing at 24, 25 years old, but in the latter stages of their career, as you would say, if you're looking at it through a more traditional viewpoint or a more conventional lens, you'd go, actually, no, they were better at this stage. They were better at that stage. So don't rule out Viktor Gyökeres on that basis. Lewandowski's another one been mentioned in the chat. Harry Kane, I think, has gotten better and better as the years have gone on in terms of adding more strings to his bow. So this idea that because Gyökeres is 27, it means that his best days have already been had and are behind him is crazy. But, you look at Viktor Gyökeres and you're looking at him as a very ripe signing in that he's here to win now. And at this stage in his career, having had those experiences, he should be ready to assist us and aid us in what we want to achieve this season. So there will be a bit of pressure, no doubt about that. But don't assume that because he's 27 years old, he can't get better. He could still get better. And I think he will get better at Arsenal Football Club. So really excited by this and excited by how keen he is as well to make this move and the fact that he seems to be pulling out all the stops. It's why I've gone for a thumbnail on today's YouTube video of him sort of sitting in his car, leaning out of the open window, almost Peter Odemwingie style, trying to get the move. I did get AI to create that image. It's amazing what you could do with AI these days. So that's not a real image, for full disclosure. But yeah, he's very, very keen, isn't he? And while we're on the subject of talking about our Patreon scouting videos, there is one on Viktor Gyökeres as well. And we did this a few weeks ago. There's lots of positives. in that video. Lots of things that I was impressed by. A few things that I wasn't so impressed by, and a few concerns that still exist for me. But the fact that he's been so desperate to make this move and is seemingly pulling out all the stops to make it happen is kind of won me over, I got to be honest, as opposed to Sesko, who he never felt like was ever ready or willing to really push and make his want to join Arsenal known. Maybe he doesn't want it as much. Who knows? I don't know. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Viktor Gyökeres and the stories surrounding this claim that he is willing to give up 2 million euros of his own money to facilitate this Arsenal move. Let's take your questions. Let's take your thoughts in the last part of the show. Get them in the chat box. Pop a Q at the beginning, and we'll start working our way through those.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe.
That's right. You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Like and subscribe. There's over 1,000 of you with us live on YouTube right now. A like would go a long way. I'd very, very much appreciate if you'd smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you're new as well. Help us on the way to our next milestone. If you're listening on Apple in particular, we really, really need reviews. So if you wouldn't mind leaving us a review, I'd be hugely grateful for that. If you are listening to us via Spotify, leave us a review as well. But our Spotify listeners seem to be much more keen to leave reviews at the moment than our Apple listeners, and I don't know why that is. But anyway, whichever platform you're tuning in from, do it. If you're a patron, you'll get access to our episodes ad-free as well. That's another benefit to being a Chronicles of a Gooner patron. So do check that out as well. Okay. Gooner72 says, Harry, is Gyökeres a dial mover? I think he is. I think that, throughout this entire search for a striker, I've looked at him and I've looked at Sesko and I've said, look, there are good points, but there are also points that I would question and arguments I'd make to the contrary. But I think when you look at his goal record, I think when you look at the fact that we don't seem to have that many players that are just obsessed with being out and out goal scorers and rifling the ball into the back of the net, I think just by default, having him in the squad and having someone of that mentality and mindset, I do think it changes things for Arsenal. I really, really do. So yeah, I think he is a dial mover for sure. Afsar says, we tend to cross the ball a lot, but Gyökeres is not very good in the air. Will that be an issue? I don't know if he's not very good in the air or if Sporting just didn't really play that way. I think that's one of the areas of his game that I look at and I think, you're going to need to work on that. Because if we're talking about him being this kind of solution to the low block problem that we often face, sometimes the only way is to put crosses in from those wide areas. And you'd like to, wouldn't you, have a striker that is competent aerially? So I don't know that I see it as a massive issue, because when I talk about him and his heading ability, I'm purely going by some of the numbers that I read, rather than looking at, the player through extensive research and having a real understanding of what his game looks like. If Sporting don't put crosses into the box, I think if you score that many goals for Sporting and none of them are headers, then I would question how many heading opportunities they create for you. I can't believe that a player that scores that many goals in that league is just completely incompetent when it comes to heading the ball. So I think it's probably a lot to do with playing style, but I guess, yeah, that's one of the questions in my mind for sure. Andy says, would you rather have Rodrigo or Eze and Madueke if you had to choose, particularly considering who might be better for Gyökeres? This is a really good question. Really, really interesting question. Rodrigo or Eze plus Madueke? Ho, 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 ho. I don't think the combination of Eze and Madueke would end up costing that much more, by the way, than Rodrigo, which is crazy. I think Rodrigo's that real kind of statement signing, isn't he? You're getting him from Real Madrid, Brazilian international. I could see why some people would lean that way. I think in terms of raising the level of the squad, and this is largely because I really rate Eberechi Eze more than anything else, I might just lean towards Eze and Madueke, but it's not by much. I'm going to regret that answer, aren't I, when I read the comments later? We'll see. Android says, are you as surprised as me about the Madueke links, given the apparent attitude issues, dropped due to training performances twice and all that crap with the penalty taking. Yeah, you've just reminded me of the penalty taking stuff. I don't like that type of thing. I don't think Mikel Arteta likes that type of thing. And so I think there's some validity to your point there about maybe us being a little bit surprised by this link. I think when you consider all of that stuff, it feels more like a strange link to me because of what we're going to have to pay than anything else. But these are all very, very relevant factors and things to consider for sure. Therat says, hello, Harry. Is there any information about Fabio Vieira, Reece Nelson, and Lokonga? Are they going to stay with us for the next season or are they leaving? I personally haven't got any information on either of them. I'd imagine that the intention would be to move all three on. But I think with players like this, players that have kind of been left by the wayside a little bit, in that you've got Fabio Vieira, who went back on loan to Porto, but it doesn't look like Porto are going to want to sign him on a permanent deal. You've got or can afford to sign him on a permanent deal. You've got Reece Nelson, who we loaned out last season with the intention of that paving the way, I think, for a permanent move. Obviously, injuries were a problem there, but Fulham still apparently have some interest. And then Lokonga, I think he would have been quite happy to stay at Sevilla, but for issues they're experiencing, they aren't able to make that deal permanent, or maybe don't want to make that deal permanent. So because these players have kind of been left by the wayside a little bit, I think these are players that we will eventually move on, but probably not until quite late in the window. And I think we need to stay patient around the futures of these guys. Tom says, hi, Harry. Let's say Chelsea don't budge on their Madueke valuation and we pivot for another Saka backup option. Which players would work for you? Honestly, mate, I haven't really thought about it too much. I've kind of been very kind of narrow-minded in this transfer window, and maybe that's a bad thing, but it's been for me improvement, and I'm not interested in players that are going to maybe raise the floor but not raise the ceiling. And I understand that in a transfer window, particularly when you lose players, you're going to have to do some of those bits of business. But in the wide positions, I'd rather that we go and throw the kitchen sink at a player that's going to improve us, whether that's Rodrigo, whether that's Eze playing as a kind of makeshift, left winger or whatever. I don't know. But in terms of backup players, I'm not looking for backup players. I'm looking for players that are good enough to compete, to knock on the door, to start games as well. So maybe I'm being a bit of a snob, and maybe, I'm turning my nose up at some of the other options that have been discussed, but it feels to me like the idea of bringing in a backup player, it's not really one we should be entertaining. And that's in part why I don't really like the Madueke thing, because I'm kind of like, well, if you're going to spend 50 million quid, which is what Chelsea are demanding, why wouldn't you put that into the pot and go and get your Rodrigo or your Eze or someone else for that matter? So yeah, that's kind of my answer to that. Not sure I really answered your question, but there you go. What else have we got? Jason says, do you think Gyökeres has a chance of winning the Golden Boot with all the service he'll get from our midfield players? I think he has a chance. I'm not going to sit here and predict that he's going to win the Golden Boot in his first Premier League season, but yeah, I think he's got a chance because he's a really good goal scorer, and Arsenal are a side that when you watch them, you can see how a centre forward could really benefit from the way they play. So let's see. Lots of questions about Havertz. What does this move mean for Havertz? There's about 3 or 4 questions in the live chat that kind of basically are asking the same thing, just worded slightly differently. Look, Kai Havertz is a good player, and I'm sick and tired of having to defend him. His value is clear. What he brings to the team is clear. How much we missed him when he was out was clear. And I think we're talking about upgrading in terms of that specific centre forward role. I don't think Havertz is a natural centre forward. So, he's obviously having to adapt a little bit as well. He wants to drop deep. He wants to go left. He wants to go right. His game isn't to stand in that number 9 position and occupy. I think Gyökeres does have that mobility to go drift in left and right, run channels and all the rest of it, but will predominantly occupy that centre forward position. I think, right, we don't need to obsess about who's going to start. I think if you go and spend that money on Gyökeres, Gyökeres is your starting centre forward. But Kai Havertz is going to get a lot of minutes. He's going to get a lot of opportunities to impact this team. He could play as one of the eights. You know, if Odegaard struggles again, why couldn't you have Rice and Zubimendi sitting as this kind of double pivot? Obviously, Rice will have that kind of box-to-box license because he's got the fitness to keep up with that type of demand. But why couldn't Havertz play as one of the eights? And when we were in possession, go up alongside Viktor Gyökeres. And then you've got two really physically powerful, dominating players playing like two centre forwards when you're in possession. That could be really key in unlocking some of the low blocks. Havertz can play in that midfield role. I don't think, he's perfectly cut out for that. I think the problem we've had with Kai Havertz is that he's not really a 9 and he's not really an 8. He's probably a 10. And we don't play with a 10. So at times we've put him into certain positions and he's done a good job and he's always committed and he's always fighting and he's always battling. There's never a question about his attitude and desire to do well for Arsenal Football Club. But sometimes we focus, I think, too much on the negatives, on where maybe he isn't 100% compatible with the roles that we're putting him in, rather than focusing on all the great things that he brings to the team. He's going to get plenty of minutes, plenty of game time. They both are. They both need the support of one another. And all of a sudden, we've gone from being really light at centre forward to having to play with Mikel Merino there, to having two really good options in my eyes in Gyökeres and Havertz. And we got Jesus to come back as well. So again, we talked about the squad last season a lot, didn't we? And we need the squad to be strong, and it will be stronger for having Gyökeres and Havertz. Whoever starts, doesn't really matter to me. I don't mind. I think they're both useful players, and I'd quite like to see them at times utilized together. So it's really, really exciting. It is. What else have we got in the chat? SP says, how many goals do you think Gyökeres scores next season? I'm going to say, feel free to clip this up and remind me of it later. I'm going to say 23 goals in all comps. Because it's not because look, first of all, there's always that question about how does what he managed to do in Portugal translate to the Premier League? It's a big question. What's the exchange rate, as Deluded Guna put it when we spoke recently? And then the next question, right, is having that out-and-out centre forward. Okay, it means that he's going to get on the end of some opportunities that our less conventional number 9s probably wouldn't get on the end of. But at the same time, I think there will be games where he is marked out of the game. And the good thing about that is that should, in theory, create spaces and limit the opposition's ability to double up on us and to triple up on us sometimes and to plug all the holes that they need to stop Arsenal. I think with the signing of Viktor Gyökeres, we're all looking at him. We're going out and out number 9. He's got to get X amount of goals. I think you've got to look at the Arsenal attack, right, as more of an ecosystem than it being about any one individual. And Gyökeres coming in and being that more conventional out-and-out number 9 means that, in theory, he should get on the end of the types of opportunities that some of our less conventional 9s would, because he should be in the right places at the right time. But at the same time, taking the attention away of the two centre-backs and limiting their ability to go out and support the fullbacks when defending against the likes of Saka or whoever else, that's also important for us. It's really important for us because there's times now where we work the ball out to Saka and the fullback can come over. The centre-back can slightly adjust his position and come inside and anticipate, the potential of Saka skipping inside the fullback and be there to clean up. Because our centre-forward might not always be standing in that centre-forward position. And so they look around and they go, that's fine, we can leave that space. One centre-back can handle it. My DM dropping back can handle it, can help, can support. I'm going to go and deal with the danger. If Viktor Gyökeres is standing on the penalty spot, that is danger. And he's so powerful and he's so physical that you're not going to want to leave him 1v1. So I think Viktor Gyökeres' value comes in what he brings to the Arsenal attacking ecosystem as much as what he brings on an individual level. And that's a really, really important point. Okay. St. Francis thinks that Saka's assists could well end up blowing up with Viktor Gyökeres coming in. I agree with that. Lots of people saying that, actually. Yorgos says 23 goals is a little low in all comps, 23 in the league, and I hear you. Also, do you think he'll take over penalty duty from Saka? I don't know about taking over penalty duty. Saka, I don't know about Saka from the spot, man. Like, I used to be so confident in him, had a bit of a wobble, especially at Madrid when he tried the Panenka. And I can't even say what I was saying when he missed that. There was a fair few expletives. What the F are you doing, Bukayo? Bukayo, have you effing lost your mind? Was pretty much what was going through my mind at that point. 23 goals low in all comps. I don't think it is, because it goes back to the point that I've just made about the ecosystem. If you think about when Arsenal's attack in recent years has been at its most potent, it was when there was multiple contributors. If he got 23 goals in all comps, that's probably still like a really good return, because it should also, in theory, boost the returns of Saka, of Martinelli, of Odegaard, of Rice, of Havertz. Marino, we know, can chip in with a goal as well. Trossard, if he stays. Yeah, there's a lot. That I think will benefit from outside of just the goals. And I don't want to obsess over the goals, because if I see Viktor Gyökeres come in and Arsenal as an attacking force become much more potent, in part because he's scoring goals, but in part because of the other reasons I've discussed, then that signing has done its job. I don't think we should obsess with putting a number on how many he's going to score. Obviously, there's an expectation. And the question was, how many do I expect? I expect that minimum 20. Right? Anything lower than that, you're going to start to ask questions. And you're going to start to say, well, hold on a minute. But if he gets just over that mark, I'm not going to say he hasn't been outstanding if it's also contributing to everybody else thriving. And that's really, really important to this Arsenal team. We are an attacking ecosystem. We're not a team built of individuals. So, yeah, I think that's central to Mikel's philosophy. And I think that's why Gyökeres can bring us value in other ways as well. Okay, going to leave it there. Thank you all so much for your support on today's show. Remember, if you want to check out our Ebereche Eze video on Patreon, you can do so via the link in the description. The Zubimendi one is still open to the public if you want to click on the link in the description for about an hour now. So go over and check that out if you haven't done so already. If you like what you see, sign up, become a patron. Leave us a like here on the Chronicles of a Gooner YouTube channel. Subscribe as well if you haven't done so already. And if you're listening on audio, get those reviews. It really, really does help. I'll see you all on the next one. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a wonderful day. Up the Arsenal. Goodbye.